You're watching The Luke Bryan Show.
I still remember one of my first cases, and one of the clients that had a really difficult situation for them, and the case is public, so I can talk about it. It's Pritchard versus Finesse. It was one of my first reported decisions, and I remember how I felt for that client and what they were going through, and I remember not really knowing a whole lot at the time. I was just fresh out of articles and had just started being a lawyer. I think it was only a few months in, and I just remember how hard I worked, and what that took. And I think that's something that everyone at our firm has. And what really attracted me to join you with this firm and with this endeavor was that commitment to really helping people and doing whatever it takes to get there. And I think that's what kind of flows into the hard work and the quality of the work and all of those things, is taking a personal interest in your clients and their success, and making their cause your cause, and caring about them. That helps when everyone's of like mind, and so you're not just trying to figure all these things out by yourself. You have a bunch of other like-minded colleagues and associates and staff that are all around you doing the exact same thing, and so you can kind of stand on the shoulders of giants in some ways. And it's a really neat place to work.
Yeah, and you touched on something. One of our other core values is that commitment piece, and one of the things that I think is not completely unique, but certainly somewhat unique, is our kind of practice as trial lawyers, and it's being a trial lawyer is a very intense job, and it involves a huge amount of commitment. But tell me a bit about your passion for being a trial lawyer and being in the courtroom, not specifically, what it's like for you, and that why it matters so much.
Yeah. Courtroom work is definitely the most exhilarating thing that we do. I mean, there's a lot of analogies, I think, to sports, and people make those analogies. But the big reason that court's really important to me is I don't think that you can represent your clients fully unless you have that tool in your bag. I think if you're not able to go to court or you don't do well in court, then at some point, a case reaches an impasse, and if you can't settle, you have to let a judge decide the case for you. And if you don't step into a courtroom, you can't get that result. And so that's something that's been a passion for me, is trying to get in court as much as I can, and develop those skills and be able to represent clients at that end game. And so if we need to get there, then that's where we're at. And it's not always the case that you have to go to trial. I think very few cases go to trial, probably 3 to 5% or maybe less. But it's ultimately, it's the end game. It's where all cases are decided if the lawyers can't sort them out or the parties can't resolve them.
Yeah, and one thing I found was a real challenge as a young lawyer was just how complex a courtroom is in terms of the rules. And there's a million rules. Yeah, there's a million rules, and half of them are written, half of them aren't, and some matter that are written, some don't, and figuring that out, and the rules of evidence and how to present a case to a judge it's extremely complex. And for me that's something I loved, was the complexity and learning that, because the challenge of becoming a good trial lawyer was so enormous. And
what's your most memorable moment in the courtroom?
It was the cross-examination of a psychiatrist. He was the head of psychiatry at a major hospital in British Columbia, and it's a reported decision. So and this is all public record. So our client had some mood disorders, some psychological disorders, and the doctor for ICBC said that wasn't true. That she did have these. She was fine, and our doctor had said she wasn't fine. And so I'm essentially questioning this guy who's the head of psychiatry in his field. It's not my field. I've never been to medical school. I've never become a psychiatrist, but I have learned a lot about psychiatry, and I was able to essentially flip his opinion completely. And I remember this moment in the cross-examination. I think you were there watching it.
I was there. I remember this.
And I asked him a question, and it was the ultimate question, which brought, his whole opinion fell apart. And it was just silence in the courtroom. And I was just staring him in the eyes, and he was looking at me, and he had no idea what to say. And his entire opinion fell apart in that moment. And it was such a powerful moment. And it was the ultimate thrill of being in a courtroom is really cross-examining an expert to the point that they change their opinion.
I think the backstory to that, because I was there, I was sitting in the gallery watching this all happen, and I remember how tense it was and how impactful it was, and but the amount of work that went up to it. I remember sitting in your office and going through your cross-examination and how much work you put into those questions and closing those doors and leading up to that ultimate question. It's not something that you just walk into a courtroom and deliver, and I think that was the interesting thing, is because usually cross-examinations are quite boring, but I think you obviously had a really good angle and were very successful in that cross-examination, but the amount of work that went into that, maybe you can talk about how much work went into that.
Yeah, I mean the work of cross-examination is not in hours; it's in years. The art and the science of cross-examination is just massively complex, and learning the technical skills, and then actually it's not simply learning them; it's knowing them well enough to think on your feet so incredibly fast, because it's in the moment, and you have these ideas of what the questions you want to ask, but you don't know exactly how the witness will respond, and it's this game of cat and mouse, and it's really, but it's governed by incredibly complex rules, the game of cat and mouse. And so to really play it well, you have to understand the complexity of those rules and be able to essentially trap the witness. I give this analogy, you and I have talked a lot about this, is cross-examination is it's like there's this person sitting in a chair or standing in the middle of a round room, and there's like 10 doors that are all open when you start the cross-examination. And before I start asking any real questions, it's close all those doors. So the witness can't run out the door when you ask him the question that really, or her the question that really matters. And so it's such a fascinating game, and it involves so much strategy, and I guess it's so intense, and that's what I love.
I remember that trial. It was probably, I don't know how long it was, but it was either 5 or 10 days or something. And opposing counsel walked in, and as she walked in, basically the whole firm was sitting in the back gallery, including me and I think a bunch of students and some other lawyers, and because we were all excited for this cross-examination because we knew it was going to be really good. And the lawyer walked up and said, cross-examinations are really boring. I don't think, I don't know why you guys are all here. And we were like, okay. And then it was just, it was fire.
Yeah, I remember the first time. That another really exhilarating moment was the first time I flipped an expert in terms of their opinion during cross-examination.
I remember that because you came to me and you're like, "Oh, that never happens. I don't think it'll happen again." And then it happened every other trial after that.
Yeah, it's happened. I've had a lot of success at it, and it's the hardest skill, I think, in terms of being a good trial lawyer is that, and it's really because you're questioning a person in their field of expertise, and it's not my field of expertise, and I have to learn it well enough to beat them at it, and that just takes a lot of work. But tell me about your passion about being in the courtroom, and what do you love? What are your favorite moments?
Yeah, so my favorite moment is probably the last year. I was in the Court of Appeal on a lien case, and I just remember being there and the Court of Appeal is quite a unique experience because you get to, there's like red carpets, and it's very formal, and you're all robed up, and there's a 3-justice panel, and all of them are grilling you, and you don't get into your submissions very far, and you really got to be on your feet and prepared and know your arguments inside and out. And I remember going through my submissions, it was my turn, and then when I was done, we had a break and we went out, and I was like, oh, I felt like that went pretty well. I think like things went okay. And then all the other counsel stood up, and they did an amazing job as well, and came back to me for reply. And then all of a sudden, I just got bombarded with questions from the bench, and went out of there going, maybe it didn't go as well as I thought it did. And ultimately, we were successful in the appeal and overturned the decision. But I just remember kind of being on my feet and just kind of how alive we felt. And then bigger than that, the impact that decision had for our client was just absolutely, it was just so significant. It ended up being the difference between them having a place to live and them not having a place to live. And that's why we were fighting so hard for the decision. So yeah, I think that was one of my favorite moments, not just for the experience in the courtroom, but also for the impact it had for the client and reminding us why we do what we do.
Yeah, that was going to be my next thing, is like, my next question for you is the why, why we do this. And, I talk about the thrill of this cross-examination, but the why is the really important part. And in that case, it made an enormous difference to my client in her life, and she was able to receive a compensation award that was quite substantial, and take care of her. And she'd been in a bad car accident and wasn't able to work, and so really at the end of the day, that's where my passion springs from, is really it's making a huge difference in someone's life, and that is changing the trajectory of their life often. And yeah, so I mean, you touched on that a little bit in terms of that case, but tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, that's exactly why we do what we do, and why you work so hard, and why you put in the time, and why you want to be the best that you can be, so that you can get those types of results and make sure that you can make those changes for people. And yeah, those are definitely the reasons we do what we do, I think. And I think that's something that's the same for everybody in our firm, and that's something that we really work hard to maintain. And this goes back to that culture piece. I mean, we've kind of gone on a bit down a rabbit hole here, but going back to it, I mean, this is that culture.
Yeah, and I think when I look back over my legal career, those are some of the most rewarding moments. I think of a moment a little over a year ago. I settled a very large case for a client that was quite badly injured, and I'll never forget the moment when we had the last meeting, and he got his payout, and he was just like, "Luke, can I hug you?" And he's this big strapping guy, and he's hard, kind of a hardcore guy, and he's just got tears in his eyes, and he says, "You saved my life," and that's a powerful moment.
Yeah, I remember that case. It was one of many cases where you've made a significant difference in somebody's life, and it's quite an inspiring thing. I know it's inspiring for me, and yeah, no, definitely. I see you getting a bit choked up here, Luke.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is really the heart of why I do what I do, and I think this is also the heart of why you and I are so close. It's because I think we share that passion at such a deep level.
So take me through, after you got called, and sort of your trajectory through law, and getting to where you're at now. I mean, we've kind of talked about your upbringing, and we've talked about, you becoming a lawyer, but we haven't talked about how you got to here.
Yeah, that's so I did a history degree, and then I went to law school at UBC, and I had moved out there with my wife, and we were both from the Fraser Valley, Chilliwack and Abbotsford, and I thought, oh, I'll just go to law school, and we'll move back to the Valley, and I'll be a lawyer out there. And then moved to Kitsilano, and I was living near Kits Beach, and just thought, well, this is fantastic. Why I'm not moving back? And so ended up getting a job at a big downtown law firm, like I think it's one of the top 3 or 4 biggest law firms in British Columbia, and had a great experience there in the sense of great experience as a litigator, and I had some phenomenal mentorship there, and got some just incredible experience. And one of the things so I was in this huge firm and just massive cases, and I got to work on those massive cases. But one of the new litigators every year got all the small claims work, and some of the litigators thought that the other juniors didn't want it, and I was like, I want it, because that means I get into court and I get to do the trial myself. I'll never forget my first trial. It was up in Vernon. It was a small claims debt, $2,000. It was someone's phone bill, and they didn't want to pay it. And drove up to Vernon, and I couldn't sleep the whole night. I was so nervous, and it got into the courtroom, and it was November in Vernon, and it's like the break in the first hour trial, and the judge is like, you know what? I can see my breath. It's so cold in here, and I'm like, oh, it's perfect. I'm not even sweating. And just the stress of being in the courtroom at the beginning is so high. And I was successful in that trial. And that was, the beginning of many, many trials, and started out with a lot of small claims work, and just was in the courtroom all the time. And then also did very large trials there. And so went to the Court of Appeal on a 6-week trial that I had done with my mentor there. And so that's a real theme for me, and I think for you in your life as well, is mentorship. And I've had just phenomenal mentors, and that started at the initial law firm I started at, and then had a kid, and decided to move back to the Valley, and joined a substantial law firm in the Fraser Valley, one of the larger ones, and worked there for 14 years, and again had phenomenal mentorship, and really some of the top litigators in the province were mentors to me, and just taught me so much. And so what that looked like was just going to trial a lot, going with those mentors, and then a lot on my own, and then also then starting to mentor other people, and maybe that ties into a bit of our story.
Yeah, no, definitely. I remember the first time, one of the first times I met you. I mean, we did the interviews and stuff, and then you guys decided to bring me on. This must have been 2013 or 2014, and he was invited me out to a baseball game, and I went to the baseball game because he knew my history playing baseball, and it was a lot of fun. But afterwards, I had to sign my articling contract, and I remember, and people, if anyone knows Luke, they know that he takes his shirt off a fair amount, but his shirt was definitely off, and I signed my articling contract with Luke there, tarps off, and that was the beginning of just an amazing friendship and mentorship, and you really took me under your wing and taught me much of what you know. And then I was fortunate enough to be around a lot of the other incredible litigators at the firm. Got to junior some trials with some titans of the industry. Learned a lot, and on sort of in reflection, you don't know what you don't know. So I didn't even actually see how brilliant some of the litigation was, and some of the skills that they had were until I kind of went back into it afterwards. And I was like, oh man, they were doing all of this stuff too. And it was, really cool to go back and kind of see that. And so kind of being steeped in that level of skill was incredible for me starting out. It was great. And then keeping a broad base for litigation as well. I think at the time we didn't know what was going to happen with personal injury. Now they've gone to no fault, and that was a big area of practice for the firm, and something that I was very passionate about because of what had happened with my mom. So I definitely tried to learn other areas, and that was at your guidance as well. And so did a bunch of commercial and civil litigation and defamation, and really anything that I could get in there and fight for somebody that had a cause that I really believed in. There's definitely a lot of them out there. I think there's a lot of people that struggle, and access to justice is a big issue, and it's something that we try and tackle as much as we can.
Absolutely, and that's a big, I guess, part of who we are as a firm as well, is that we tend to act more for individuals than large corporations, and that's, I think, resonates with who both you and I are, and I think we like fighting the fight, and the David and Goliath, and I think both that resonates with, well, certainly with me in terms of fighting the fight for the people that really need it.
In my articles, I start off doing some criminal stuff, not really by choice, but I think it's important to kind of get that broad perspective. But then after that, I did a lot of commercial and civil litigation, everything from neighbor disputes and property lines, and dog feces left on lawns, and loud waterfalls, and use and enjoyment of property, and all the way up to now doing multi-million-dollar estate and commercial and personal injury matters. And so it's been quite the journey. I think you started out with a phone bill, and and now here you are as well. It's a journey for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you start out with a $2,000 phone bill, and next thing you know, you're doing multi-million-dollar commercial disputes, and it's one of the things you touched on a little bit when you were just talking is strategy, and I think that's something that both you and I are very passionate about. And I actually harken back to my childhood. One of the things that I love about my childhood was my dad played chess with me just like constantly, and so it was starting when I was 6 years old. It was chess almost every day, and by the time I was 10 or 11, I could beat most adults at chess. And although I don't play much chess anymore, I'm just too busy, but a lot of what we do is like chess, and it's kind of seeing the end game. And one of our sayings about our firm is we talk about it being caring strategists and chess, not checkers, right? And it's really thinking about how to, when I meet a client, the big thing I start with is kind of tell me a bit about what's happened, and then the big question is, where do you want this to go? What ending do you want? And then my job is to build a strategy to get to that end game, and how can I get to that end game and achieve that outcome that the client is looking for? Tell me a bit about how you approach it in terms of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I learned from the best, so I approach it the same way. but I think there's more elements to it than that. I mean, it's not just where do you want to go and let me develop a strategy to get there, but it's also what's the most economic strategy, what's the quickest strategy. A lot of getting to where the client wants to get has other parameters to it, and being able to kind of walk things out. We talk about this a lot. It's like, well, if I do this, what are they going to do? What's the response? And being able to kind of see all the different steps and all the different plays and go through that is really what I think separates great counsel from average counsel, and that's something that we certainly strive for. And the more you get into the late games, the more you're able to see all the steps getting to the late games. And so, yeah, really focusing on being in that end game a lot, and all the strategies to get there is something that's really important. And often clients say, I don't want to get to the end game. And so, a lot of your strategy is, well, how do I avoid this? You certainly know how to get there. So it's how do you avoid it, And so, yeah, definitely something that's important for me, and I know for us, is being caring strategists.
Yeah.
You're watching The Luke Bryan Show.